So let's talk about the transcript, because it sounds to me like you might be open to evidence of personal interest, and that might influence your position. And in the transcript from the phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky starts by saying, I would also like to thank you for your great support in the area of defense, talks about Javelin missiles. Immediately afterwards, President Trump says, I would like you to do us a favor, though. Starts talking about the 2016 elections, which has been disproven by the intelligence community. And then says the other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son and that Joe Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. So if you could look into that. So the president says, read the transcript, and when you do, you get the sense that he was withholding in order to look into the Bidens. Okay.
Well,
right. But look into the Bidens. In this particular case, he was very specific about the Bidens. Right?
And he was also referring to us, and he was, which us is a inclusive term, including the United States of America, and to a lot of folks that have concern about this corruption that is occurring in Ukraine.
Yeah, okay, but very specific in that. In the transcript that you talked about, the phone call, very specific about the Bidens. Joe Biden, front runner in the Democratic race right now. Would it be safe to say that he's a political opponent of President Trump at this point?
Well, of course, political opponent and also former vice president who had official roles and actually used his official roles, as he proudly depicted on videotape evidence of his role to stop the continuation of the proceeding in the Ukraine.
So a public investigation, or at least an announcement, would theoretically have the potential to hurt his campaign?
I think if there's any issues of corruption that Joe Biden is associated with, then of course that is going to impact his political prospects.
Your colleague, Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy, talked about how motive is so important here. And that's what we've been talking about, is whether this was personal gain or whether this was for public interest. Do you know of any other attempts by President Trump to ask a foreign government to investigate a U.S. citizen in corruption?
There are ongoing corruption activities that the president and we are concerned about. You look at the aid that even goes to China. Why we're giving aid to China, I still don't understand. But there's corruption at Chinese local levels and things like that. So I'm aware, and I don't know of any specific conversations because I've not been privy to them where the president has indicated that, but I am aware that there's a general concern about foreign aid, taxpayer dollars that are going to entities that are corrupt.
Do you know of any, by extension, do you know of any instances where the president withheld military aid in order to ask for an investigation into a U.S. citizen? Any other cases?
Yeah, there are cases where I am aware that individuals of American background and American citizenship potentially could have been involved in corruption. That is a concern.
Right. But the question is, do you know if the president? Do you know of any other cases where President Trump got involved by himself with his personal attorney to pressure a foreign country to investigate a U.S. citizen?
Well, clearly, I mean, I don't have any information where I was in the room with the president and that type of thing. So no, I don't have that. But I do know there's many of us that are always concerned about corruption and are aware of corruption activities where they're being investigated by appropriate U.S. authorities.
And naturally I ask that because if he were doing it on several different occasions with several different countries, it would fit into a broader umbrella of corruption and would certainly support the argument that this was about corruption and not political advantage / private interests. Could the president have gone to the DOJ instead of sending his private attorney in to do this?
Sure, and I think even in the transcript it refers to the Attorney General. And I think the DOJ is a good tool in order to root out corruption, especially when that corruption is both foreign and potentially domestic. And obviously, DOJ has a limited jurisdiction. It's a domestic organization, but it has relationships with foreign justice departments that could be brought to bear to investigate that
various
corruption.
Agencies, right?
Correct.
But that request to go speak with Bill Barr was after he had already had Giuliani in there, was after he had asked Zelensky to look into the Bidens. So why not go through the DOJ initially, seeing that, you know what, Joe Biden is a political opponent. I could see where this could appear to be a conflict of interest.
Yeah, I guess that's where, I mean, obviously we get the benefit of hindsight, and Monday morning quarterback. Is there always a better way to go about things? I guess, of course. But the bottom line, you can't speculate about that. You can't speculate. What is presented is what's presented. And with the presumption of innocence, with the evidence that's been released, the transcript being released, I think this is well vetted, and I think at the end of the day, the senators will ultimately make the call. But most importantly, Adam, the American people will make the call come November.
So, not even speculation then. Was it inappropriate then to bring it up with Zelensky before going to the DOJ, or even himself, given the proximity to the political nature of this?
No, I think what the president did was a legitimate exercise of presidential authority, and I think it speaks for itself. And however you want to interpret and conclude, it speaks. That's your prerogative.
Yeah.
That's your ability to do that, and for the American people to decide too on this, which is a good thing. The American people ultimately, clearly, what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now is political theater. It's a lot of playing to political bases, in my humble opinion, and a lot of information is being put out there. And that information is being digested by the American people. At the same time, it's being digested by 100 senators. And that's a good thing in the sense of this next November, people will have a chance. They are the ones I trust to make this ultimate decision.
But our founding fathers, it's in the Constitution. Impeachment, let's get this on the table. You think it's a viable tool in certain cases, right?
Well, of course. I mean, that's why.
Because you keep saying the American people, the impeachment was built to do stuff like this.
Of course. The wisdom of the founding fathers cannot be contested by putting impeachment into the Constitution. Because you will have, or could potentially have, such an egregious violation of a bad actor getting into the White House that you have to remove before the next election occurs. Totally understand. But I also think the 200 plus years of our existence speaks volumes to this issue too. That impeachment and removing a duly elected president never occurred in our nation's history. 200 plus years of wisdom by those generations that came before us cannot be discounted in this debate also.
Agreed, and there's no question that there's some political theater going on in D.C. right now. At the same time, do you think that there are Democratic lawmakers who truly believe this is personal interest and therefore bribery or abuse of power in this case?
And that's why I acknowledge that the people that support impeachment and removal, I would put Democratic elected officials. There are some that I'm sure believe that. And I understand where they're coming. I disagree with them and their interpretation of the evidence. I disagree with them whether or not this rises to the level of impeachable offense as they've concluded. And so I see where they're coming from. I just disagree with it.
Understood. I just want to get you to respond to two things that stuck out to me during this whole process, because Lord knows we heard a lot of stuff in the House. We heard from the president's man in Europe, Gordon Sondland, and he's a big Trump supporter. No one can doubt his loyalty to the president. And he said under oath that Giuliani never expressed interest in an investigation, only in the announcement of an investigation. Does that concern you at all?
Sondland, that statement per se, Giuliani is not the ultimate decider of whether or not an announcement or a conclusion or an investigation. That defer to them in regards to. So it's not overly concerning to me along those lines. But also it also opens up the door, and I'm sure we'll get into his conclusion that he articulated during his testimony. That this was well-known quid pro quo or whatever you want to. But then when pushed, well, no, I don't have any firsthand evidence. I've never seen that per se.
Right.
Convicting an individual, let alone the President of the United States, by innuendo, very dangerous slippery slope to go down.
I wasn't going to get into it.
I wanted to bring that up because
I know there was a hole in that one.
Yeah, and
I agree. I agree.
That was very problematic. And
I
so
agree.
You hear that, and so other statements have to be taken with that also. You can't take each statement or piece of information that he offers in an isolated manner.
Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, when pressed during the press conference, was asked about whether there was personal interest here, and he said, "Get over it, there's going to be political influence in foreign policy." I mean, you're a lawyer, you're building a case, right? And if you're on the other side, you look at the totality of the evidence. You hear that, how does that weigh in your mind?
Well, you know, I'll defer to Mick as to what he intended, and I know he backtracked those commentaries afterward. But when this was all going down in that moment in time, I can distinctly remember thinking about, you know, what is he trying to say there? I'm trying to understand what he's referring to. And one thing that stuck on my mind, and this happened because I lived it, it came in my mind, was, you know, what President Obama did in regards to when he was caught on the hot mic whispering to the Russian leaders, hey, give me till the next election in order to take care of this situation. I don't know what he was talking about, but, you know, obviously these are world leaders. These are folks that have a relationship, and their political position, their political abilities to stay for another term, or on both sides of the equation. And I'm sure those conversations are occurring between our world leaders in regards to, you have your official responsibility and you have your unofficial positioning. And that's, you know, that's where, when Mick started backtracking his commentary, I thought maybe that's what he was referring to.
I can totally understand how a lot of this leaves questions in your mind. If you have questions, why not call upon the president to have Giuliani testify before you?
That's where, if I had the ability to go back and control how impeachment, and if we are in that position in the future, we'll want to make sure we do all of this work in that investigation. Get the Justice Department involved. Go through the court process. I know it's tedious. I know it's long. I know people will say it could be a stalling tactic. But you're dealing with impeachment. You're talking about one of the fundamental principles of our democracy, and that's an election. And so I think it's worth it to do that and to pursue it that way. And so as you go down this path after the fact, I hesitate to say it is what it is, and we are where we are.
So you would have supported that testimony? You would have liked to hear it?
Yeah, the more testimony, I think looking back at the House's handling of this situation, I think could have averted a tremendous amount of where we are if they had gone through that exhaustive process.
I could see a situation in the future where the Republicans see a potential high crime and misdemeanor, right? And it's a year before the election, but they're like, this was so serious, we have to act on this now. And a Democratic president holds back witnesses, documents, and they say, take it through the courts.
Adam, you're absolutely right. And this is one of the long-term impacts on our democracy I'm concerned about this impeachment will have. And that is, you have now politicized the tool of impeachment. You've pushed the nuclear button, so to speak. And just as there's 50% of Americans that support not having President Trump in office as the president, there's 50% of Americans that do support President Trump in office. And that's going to flip back and forth as we go forward. You know, President Trump, as I said to the folks on the Democrat, President Obama is not going to be president forever. President Trump's not going to be president forever. And this is where the danger of this becomes. And I hope, and one thing I have demonstrated to people, I am willing to stand up when we need to stand up. And you go down this path, and the next president, be it a opposite scenario, I hope there would be members like myself there that would say, you know what, it doesn't matter. But if impeachment is the warranted tool, we're not going to use it for politics. We're going to use it for that protection of the country.
I think that's a good point. I understand the point. I think you're dealing with one half of the equation. Do you think on the other half that the president has politicized the use of executive privilege? So that can be used down the road.
And that's a fair question, and that's been used. President Obama exerted executive
but in this
privilege.
Particular case.
President Trump has exerted executive privilege. That always, I don't think it's been utilized for political purposes. I think it's a legitimate question that is very difficult to answer in a black and white way. Executive privilege is one of those things that presidents need to have.
Of course.
And it needs to be protected. But at the same time, you've got to balance it with Congress's oversight role and that separation of power ability there, that checks and balances that need to be there. So you're always going to have this inherent conflict on executive privilege. And it's not just going to be President Obama, President Trump, it'll be future presidents. He or she are going to be facing these issues on an ongoing basis. And that's, and I got to say, that's also the wisdom of the Founding Fathers. They knew we would have these conflicts. They knew this would not be something they wanted to make easy. But they also put in place check valves that need to be used appropriately. And I hope any future Congress that uses these check valves does it out of truly for the sake of country first, not party first.
On the flip side, there's concern on your part, though, or at least an acknowledgement that presidents could use executive privilege to hide.
There's always that concern with any president, that executive privilege could be exerted nefariously without legitimate grounds, of course. And that's why the beauty of the system is we have an independent body, be it the judicial branch, a court of law that can adjudicate whether or not that is a legitimate use of that privilege.
Going back to Clinton, you told Chris Cuomo, you said this, I was a lawmaker, or no, you said, you told Chris Cuomo, you're a lawmaker who does not support the Clinton impeachment looking back historically. I noted that word historically. Did you support it at the time?
I didn't. No,
really?
I will tell you, I was also in the middle of, I can remember that trial. My mother was passing away in my arms, literally, at that time. December 20th is when she passed in 1998, and I remember those last 4 to 5 months of her life and being in her bedroom and seeing that going on in the background.
Really?
And really what I saw there was like, it's one of the reasons why it planted the seed for me to get involved in public service. Not necessarily just that situation, but it was like, really? I mean, I understand. I mean, it was such a circus then, and now we have another circus.
So I grew up in Pittsford, no stranger to the GOP. I think you're the first Republican that I've met who didn't support the Clinton impeachment.
Well, I appreciate that, but I mean, to me, as you went through that, and I think maybe it was also, I mean, the country, clearly, I mean, there wasn't a conviction, there wasn't a removal of the president. And I think a lot of the country came to the same conclusion I did when I was watching it was, really?
Yeah.
This is what you guys are in D.C. you're going to focus on? And they're tired of it. And I, as an American citizen, I'm tired of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I encourage folks on the other side. You know, an interesting question I will put out there for history to judge is, I think censure, as there was a lot of folks about President Trump and conversations about that. That was an interesting conversation because there was some debate. You know, do you move? And even in President Clinton, the whole MoveOn.org organization came on from President Clinton's impeachment. You know, it's censure, slap, and a formal sanction.
Right.
You know that if they had pursued that, who knows what would have happened? But again, you don't get the luxury of changing history. You get to live it, but you don't get to change it.
You read my mind. You have to see that. That's literally my next penultimate question. We're
communicating with each other.
Exactly. You know, you have the GAO saying that the administration broke the law when they withheld aid because it was the Congress who said and all that. You have everything we've talked about. Would you have supported censure in this case? Take away the whole, does it rise the level to impeachment? Would you have explored censure?
Would I have explored back in the day alternative? Of course. I had an open mind to look at things in that vein. But I don't get the luxury of doing that. I don't get the luxury of going back and telling you what I do.
Censored, right?
Theoretically, I guess. I don't know. I mean, if they don't they have to start the process back over, I think.
You would know better than I.
I believe they do. And so, God, I hope they don't, because they're going to put the country through that.
But would you be open to it?
But I'm open if there's as an independent body and as a proud member of Congress, Congress needs to step up and start doing more of its obligation and responsibility overall. So I am an institutionalist. I love the U.S. Congress in the sense of what it represents, and it needs to be a check always.
So no censure right now. That's what you're saying.
I don't get the luxury of making that call.
Last question. Do you see where the president getting involved in Burisma and the Bidens in Ukraine through his personal attorney might have at the very least created an appearance of a conflict of interest?
And that's where I understand where people come from with their
But do you see it? I don't want to know.
Well, I actually see the other side of that. I actually see if there was corruption, and there was corruption by Hunter Biden and Joe Biden as a sitting vice president, that should be investigated. That should be looked at. And one of the things that concerns me through this is just because someone like Joe Biden is a political candidate, does that mean the actions he may have taken when he was in his official capacity are no longer open to investigation, be it foreign or domestic? You know, that's a problematic statement to say.
No question,
So,
but no one's saying DOJ, there's other agencies you said, but appearance of a conflict of interest, did it create that?
I understand where people could see that. I can understand where people
But
could
do
see
you
that.
see
I see this all about corruption, Adam. I really do. This is all about corruption.
I understand.
And when you look at people like Ursula Burns, who I know him from Xerox. She's serving on that board, and she's getting paid $12,000 a month, and Hunter's getting $50,000 a month, and Ursula ran a Fortune 100 company. And I'm just, there's so many red flags there, just like, what's going on here?
Sure, but but as we've gone over, there are other agencies that can look into it. President sending a personal attorney to investigate when it involves a political opponent. Appearance of a conflict of interest.
Well, and I appreciate the fact, and it's a good point. There are other entities out there that could be deployed to investigate that, and maybe that's occurring as we speak.
But appearance of a conflict. Can you understand the legitimacy of the appearance of a conflict of interest?
I always am sensitive to those concerns, but to come to that conclusion, I just see this as an investigation by the president into corruption, and on its face, there are some serious indications as to some questions that need to be answered.
Re-election campaign, happy to be a part of it?
Yeah, I am. With the president asking us to chair his re-election, I was one of the early endorsers of President Trump. I've gotten to know him as a person, and I will just tell you, one of the best things he does is bring disruption to Washington, D.C. One of the best things he does is he knows who he is, faults and non-faults and everything with that. And talking about an individual who has energy, who is committed to what he's trying to do. So I think, being part of that team, I'm proud to do and proud to be part of it. And his policies are improving lives. There's no doubt about it in my life, in my opinion. There are people that work today, have an opportunity to take care of their families in a way that hasn't been done historically ever. And that is a good thing. And we should champion that. We should be celebrating it as a nation.